The crimson void spanned before them like an ocean of stars, each point of light a distant sun that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Midshipman Jareth Vanrick stood at his station aboard the Imperial Navy escort frigate Eternal Vigilance. 3 years of service had transformed him from a hive-world nobody to an officer. The eastern fringe stretched across his monitors in cascading waves of data. Energy signatures, gravitational anomalies, radiation patterns, all flowing together in a symphony of information that required constant interpretation. The Eternal Vigilance maintained her position on the outer line, one of 4 escort vessels tasked with early warning for Battle Group Xerion. Behind them, the might of the Imperial Navy hung in the void like steel mountains against the darkness. At the center of the formation, His Divine Majesty's ship, Retribution of Skorgol, dominated the tactical display. The ancient battleship had served the Imperium since the age of apostasy, her scarred hull bearing testament to thousands of engagements across the galaxy. Lord Admiral Castus Dalton commanded from her bridge, a veteran of 3 centuries of naval warfare whose name was whispered with reverence in officers' messes across the segmentum. Vanrick adjusted the gain on his sensors, filtering out the background radiation that permeated this region of space. The Mechanicus had warned them about the unusual stellar phenomena on the eastern fringe. Ancient stars in their death throes cast exotic particles across the void, creating sensor ghosts and false readings that could hide approaching threats until it was too late. He compensated for each anomaly, building a mental map of what belonged and what didn't. The chronometer on his console marked another hour of uneventful patrol when the first irregularity caught his attention. Unlike the random energy spikes that plagued the system, this reading showed purpose and pattern. Organic compounds in quantities that defied belief, moving through the void without any visible means of propulsion. Vanrick ran the signature through the Cogitator's threat assessment protocols, but the machine spirit returned only confusion. No known Xeno's profile matched what he was seeing. He keyed his Vox bead to the command frequency. Bridge, August Station 3. I'm detecting anomalous biological signatures at bearing 27 Mark 4. Range approximately 3 million kilometers and closing. Lieutenant Commander Hadrian Morse materialized beside him like a ghost, the senior officer's augmetic legs making no sound on the deck plating. Where most officers bore their scars with pride, Morse had replaced damaged flesh with sacred machinery. Half his face was a masterwork of bronze and steel, the mechanical eye whirring as it focused on Vanrick's display. How many contacts? Morse's voice carried the rasp of vocal cords damaged by vacuum exposure. Difficult to determine, sir. The signatures are overlapping, almost like they're merged somehow. Vanrick highlighted the relevant data streams. Initial scan shows at least 40 discrete contacts, but the mass readings are impossible, Morse finished. Nothing biological achieves that scale. But even as he spoke, the contacts multiplied. Where 40 had been, now there were 60, then 80. They emerged from the system's edge like a plague spreading across the stars, their approach vector aimed at the Imperial formation. Morse's organic eye widened in recognition and horror. Emperor preserve us, he whispered, then louder. General quarters, all hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. The ship erupted into controlled chaos. Klaxons wailed through corridors as crew members rushed to their posts, some still struggling into void suits as they ran. The Eternal Vigilance's plasma drives roared to life, pushing the escort into her assigned combat position. Through it all, Vanrick remained at his station, tracking the approaching nightmare with growing dread. Visual contact came as they closed to within 1 million kilometers. What Vanrick saw through the enhanced picked feeds challenged everything he thought he knew about void combat. These weren't ships in any sense that human minds could comfortably grasp. They were living creatures, vast beyond comprehension, floating through the vacuum as if it were their natural habitat. The largest specimens dwarfed even the mighty battleship, their bioluminescent organs pulsing with color. The lead creature's form was made from kilometers of chitinous armor wrapped around organs that served purposes Vanrick couldn't begin to guess. Weapon symbiotes the size of hab blocks clung to its hide like parasites, their barrel-like protrusions already beginning to glow with stored energy. Tendrils that could have crushed frigates writhed in the void, tasting the emanations of the Imperial fleet. Tyranids, someone whispered over the vox. The word carried the weight of nightmares made flesh, of worlds stripped bare and populations devoured. Vanrik had heard the stories in hushed conversations below decks, tales of the great devourer that came from beyond the galaxy's edge. He had dismissed them as void-fever dreams. Now, faced with the reality, he understood that the stories had been sanitized for the sake of sanity. The fleet's response was immediate and overwhelming. Capital ships brought their weapons to bear, the void lighting up with the fury of human defiance. Lance beams carved through space, macro-cannon shells the size of buildings hurtled toward their targets, and torpedoes launched in spreading patterns designed to overwhelm point defenses. The eternal Vigilance added her own voice to the chorus, her lighter weapons firing in support of her larger sisters. The first Imperial salvo struck home with devastating effect. Lance strikes vaporized tons of organic matter, sending clouds of flash-frozen ichor spinning into the void. Cannon rounds punched deep into chitinous armor, detonating inside the creatures' bodies. For a moment, Vanrik dared to hope that superior firepower would carry the day. Then he witnessed something that would haunt him for whatever remained of his life. The wounded bioships began to regenerate, not over hours or days, but in real time. Tissue flowed to seal wounds, new armor plates growing to replace those that had been destroyed. The creatures adapted even as he watched, their hides thickening where lance strikes had proven effective, their internal structures shifting to minimize damage from kinetic impacts. The Tyranid response came not as coherent salvos, but as a living cloud of destruction. Spores the size of shuttlecraft tumbled through space, propelled by internal gases. Swarms of smaller organisms, each one a weapon in its own right, spread out in attack patterns that spoke of terrifying intelligence. Some were recognizable as boarding craft, others seemed designed purely to corrode and destroy. Incoming ordnance, multiple vectors, Vanrik called out as his screens filled with threat indicators. Point defense grid activating. The space around the eternal Vigilance erupted in defensive fire. Autocannons and laser clusters filled the void with a curtain of death, shredding dozens of the smaller organisms. A spore the size of a cargo hauler made it through the defensive screen, impacting the escort's port armor with bone-crushing force. Vanrik's damage control panel lit up immediately, but instead of the explosive decompression he expected, sensors showed something far worse. The spore was secreting molecular acid, eating through ceramite armor that could withstand direct hits from conventional weapons. Internal sensors detected movement as something emerged from the dissolving pod. Breach on Deck 7, Port Section. Damage Control Chief Crassus's voice crackled over the vox. They're inside the ship. Sweet throne, they're inside. Through the internal picked feeds, Vanrik caught glimpses of the boarders. Creatures that seemed designed by some mad god's fever dream, all angles and blades and hungering mouths. They flowed through the corridors. Crew members fired last shots that barely slowed them down. On the tactical display, the broader battle was degenerating into a melee. The Tyranid bioships showed none of the rigid tactics that characterized most void combat. They flowed around strong points, concentrated on isolated targets, and demonstrated a coordination that spoke of shared consciousness. When the battleship's guns found their range on one creature, others would interpose themselves, sacrificing their bodies to shield the wounded. 3 destroyers on the fleet's port flank simply ceased to exist. One moment they were firing, the next they were expanding clouds of debris and atmosphere. The bioship responsible was already moving on to new targets, its massive maw still working to digest the metal and flesh it had consumed. The sight of a void ship being eaten like prey sent waves of primal terror through the fleet. New orders from the flagship, Communications Officer Prellis announced. The forge ship Omnissiah's Sacred Wrath is deploying experimental weapons. All ships are to provide covering fire and prepare for unknown effects. Vanrik watched as the massive forge ship altered its configuration. Weapon ports that had been sealed for centuries ground open, revealing systems that defied easy classification. When they fired, it wasn't with the clean energy of plasma weapons or the kinetic force of projectiles. Instead, clouds of something that registered as both matter and energy expanded outward, their composition shifting across spectrums that the augurs couldn't properly track. Where these clouds touched the bioships, the effect was immediate and horrifying. Organic matter began to break down at the molecular level, chain reactions spreading across the creature's hides like digital viruses through corrupted data. Two of the mid-sized organisms writhed in apparent agony, their biological systems failing catastrophically. Fluids boiled out of ruptures in their hulls, freezing instantly in the void. "It's working," someone shouted over the Vox. But Vanrik, still watching his screens, saw what others missed. The surviving creatures were already changing. Their biochemistry shifted in real time, developing immunity to the forged ship's weapons. The next salvo had dramatically less effect, and the third barely seemed to touch them. In minutes, they had evolved defenses against weapons that had taken centuries to develop. The Vox crackled with an emergency transmission from the Eternal Vigilance's engineering section. "Bridge, this is Chief Engineer Kotov. The Xenos have reached the plasma conduits. We're falling back to secondary containment, but they're learning the ship's layout. Each one we kill, the others seem to know what worked. They're adapting fast." Lieutenant Commander Morse made a decision that would have seemed like madness mere hours before. "Helm, bring us about. New heading, 35 Mark 7. Flank speed." "Sir, that takes us directly at the nearest bioship," the helmsman protested. "I'm aware, petty officer. We're already dying by degrees. If the Eternal Vigilance is to meet her end, let it be with her teeth in the enemy's throat. All ahead full." The escort's engines screamed as they pushed beyond safety margins. The ship groaned and protested, her ancient frame never designed for such treatment. But she responded, as she always had, carrying her crew toward what would likely be their doom. As they closed the distance, details of the bioship became hideously clear. Its surface was a living landscape of parasites and symbiotes, each one serving some incomprehensible function in the greater organism. "All forward batteries, prepare to fire on my mark," Morse commanded. "Mr. Vanrik, I want targeting solutions on what look like vital organs. Best guesses will suffice." Vanrik's hands flew across his console, the augur's machine spirit singing with the strain of close-range scanning. He identified what might have been neural clusters, digestive chambers, and propulsion organs. The data streamed to the gunnery stations even as the bioship loomed larger in the viewports. "Optimal range in 30 seconds, he reported. "Boarders have reached Deck 5, someone called out. "They're heading for the bridge. 20 seconds to optimal range." The bioship's weapons opened fire. Streams of bioplasma splashed across the Eternal Vigilance's shields, eating through them. Living projectiles impacted the hull, some exploding into clouds of digestive enzymes, others beginning to burrow through the armor with diamond-hard teeth. 10 seconds. Through the chaos, Vanrik heard the distinctive sound of Lars' fire from the corridor outside the bridge. The ship's armsmen had made their stand at the final checkpoint. The screams that followed suggested their defense hadn't held for long. Optimal range achieved. "All batteries fire." The Eternal Vigilance's forward weapons spoke as one. Lance beams carved deep into the bioship's hide at point-blank range, vaporizing organs and flash-boiling fluids. Macro cannons punched through weakened armor, their shells detonating inside the creature's body. Plasma batteries sent miniature suns burning through tissue that had never evolved to withstand such temperatures. The bioship's scream was something felt rather than heard, a psychic wave of agony that caused several bridge crew to collapse bleeding from their ears. But even in its death throes, the creature struck back. Massive tendrils, each one capable of crushing the escort like tin, whipped through space. They wrapped around the Eternal Vigilance's hull with crushing force, ceramite armor buckling under the pressure. "Hull breach on decks 3 through 7, damage control reported. "We're losing atmosphere across 40% of the ship." Morse turned to face his bridge crew, his augmetic eye glowing red in the emergency lighting. It has been an honor serving with you all. Engineer Kotov, override all plasma containment safety protocols. If we cannot survive, we'll ensure this abomination joins us in death. The Omnissiah's fire shall be our funeral pyre, Kotov's voice crackled back, initiating cascade failure in 3 minutes. Vanrik's hands moved to his personal console, entering his authorization codes for the plasma overload. Around him, other officers did the same, each one accepting their fate with the stoic courage that defined the Imperial Navy. Through the failing picked feeds, he could see other escorts making similar choices across the battle. Humanity would not go gently into that darkness. The bioship sensed the building danger, its tendrils tightening in an attempt to crush the eternal vigilance before she could detonate. Metal screamed and tore. The bridge viewports cracked, atmosphere beginning to whistle out through the gaps. Vanrik sealed his void suit, though he knew it would provide scant seconds of additional life. 2 minutes to cascade failure, Kotov reported. The machine spirits sing their death songs. Through the tactical display, Vanrik could see the broader battle reaching its climax. The flagship had closed to boarding range with the largest bioship, the two titans grappling in the void like primordial gods. Swarms of organisms covered the battleship's hull, burrowing through armor that had withstood centuries of warfare. In response, entire sections of the ship were vented to space, crew and boarders alike sucked out into the freezing darkness. The forge ship had become a beacon of destructive light, every weapon in its arsenal firing without pause. But the Tyranids kept coming, their numbers seeming infinite, their hunger boundless. 1 minute to cascade failure. May the Emperor receive our souls. The bioship made one final attempt to preserve itself, its tendrils loosening as it tried to push the eternal vigilance away. Too late. The escort's plasma drives had passed the point of no return, containment fields failing in sequence. The building's stellar fury could be felt through the deck plates, a vibration that spoke of imminent annihilation. 10 seconds. The bridge doors exploded inward, boarding organisms pouring through in a tide of chitin and claw. Lasfire and bolter rounds filled the air as the bridge crew made their final stand. Vanrik drew his service pistol, the weapon feeling impossibly small against the approaching horrors. He fired anyway, each shot a small act of defiance against the inevitable. 5 seconds. A creature reached his station, its claws raised to strike. Vanrik looked into its eyes and saw nothing he could understand, no emotion or thought that connected to anything human. It was hunger given form, evolution shaped into a perfect killing machine. He raised his pistol for one final shot. "The Emperor protects," he whispered. The plasma drives detonated. Reality tore apart as stellar fury erupted from the eternal vigilance's dying heart. The explosion expanded outward, a sphere of destruction that cared nothing for organic adaptation or chitinous armor. The bioship that had killed them died in turn, its massive form coming apart in chunks of superheated flesh that would drift through the void for eternity. Across the battle, similar scenes played out. Imperial vessels, reduced to burning wrecks, made their final strikes against the Tyranid fleet. Each death was a small sun born in the darkness, brief and terrible, and absolutely final. The void became a graveyard of mutual annihilation, where humanity's finest sold their lives at the highest possible price. The flagship's final transmission came as Lord Admiral Dalton ordered all remaining vessels to ram the largest bioships. His words, broadcast across all frequencies, would echo through naval history for millennia to come. "We are the Emperor's fury made manifest. In death, we are victorious. All ships ramming speed. Let the Xenos know that humanity dies hard." The retribution of Skorgol, ancient and mighty, accelerated toward the largest Tyranid creature. Her weapons fired until their barrels melted, her crew fought until the last rounds were expended. When she struck, it was with the force of 7,000 years of human defiance. Both ships died in the collision, their death throes visible from across the system. The aftermath was written in debris fields that would make navigation through this section of the eastern fringe hazardous for centuries. Broken hulls, both mechanical and organic, tumbled through the void in a slow ballet of destruction. The Tyranid fleet, mauled beyond immediate recovery, retreated to digest what biomass they had claimed and adapt their strategies. They would return, stronger and hungrier than before. Imperial worlds gained precious weeks from the sacrifice. Evacuation fleets launched around the clock, carrying irreplaceable technology and knowledge to safety. Defense platforms were constructed, armies mustered, and prayers offered to the Emperor for the souls of those who had bought this time with their lives. In the years that followed, naval historians would analyze every aspect of the battle. They would debate tactics and strategies, calculate loss ratios and efficiency ratings. But no amount of analysis could capture the human element of the battle, the individual moments of courage and sacrifice that had defined humanity's stand against the great devourer. The few survivors, those lucky enough to escape in life pods before their ship's final moments, brought back tales that strained credibility. The Imperium's response was predictable in its magnitude. Entire battle fleets were redirected to shore up defenses across the segmentum. The Forge worlds went into maximum production, churning out weapons and ammunition at rates that pushed even their prodigious capabilities. The Imperial Guard began mustering regiments by the dozen, each one trained in anti-Tyranid tactics developed at terrible cost. The Forge worlds responded in kind, creating ever more exotic weapons to combat the Xenos threat. Virus bombs that targeted specific genetic sequences, rad weapons that disrupted biological processes, even darker things that pushed the boundaries of sanctioned technology. Each innovation bought time, but never victory, for the Tyranids adapted as quickly as humanity could innovate. In the decades that followed, the war against the Great Devourer became a grinding attrition that consumed fleets and armies with regularity. Worlds fell despite heroic defenses, their biomass added to the growing swarm. Others held through great sacrifice, their surfaces turned to ash rather than allow the Tyranids to feed. The eternal Vigilance became a legend, her final charge against impossible odds, inspiring countless others to similar acts of heroism. The war continued. It would always continue. But as long as there were those willing to stand watch in the darkness, willing to pay the ultimate price for one more day of human existence, the light would not go out. That was the promise of the eternal Vigilance, written in the burned metal and frozen blood that still drifted through the void. That was humanity's answer to a universe that demanded their extinction. Not today, not without cost, not while we still draw breath.